What's up, everyone, and welcome to Season 7 of Inside Lines podcast. I'm your host, Atoya Burleson, and let's talk about it. The NFL is now bringing back on-field social justice messaging in the 2025 season. Teams will be able to display one of the four phrases: end racism, stop hate, choose love, or inspire change at one end zone. And also in the other, it can say, it takes all of us, mandated for the other end zone. And then also for international games, standard messages will be end racism and it takes all of us. I love that. Players also have the option to wear one of the messages on their helmets. So I look forward to see what players choose and why they decide what they choose. Okay, moving on to make it make sense. Y'all ready for this? Make it make sense. Why, when you walk up to a store, it says push on the door, but it has handles to pull? I mean, the whole design is setting you up for failure. If I see a handle, what am I going to do? I'm going to pull it. If it's push, don't put any handles on the outside. Why do you have them there? And you're saving yourself money. Does that make sense, y'all? Am I tripping? Stores, don't put push on the door and put handles there. You're tricking us. You're messing with our minds. All right, I'm gonna leave that there. This is one that I've been talking about with my husband and some friends. And we talk about this. You've heard it a lot. But It's Debatable segment is on food. Do you put butter and cheese in your grits? Or do you choose butter and sugar? If you say you eat them plain, you are just not human. But for me, personally, I love butter and sugar. And you know what? This is one debate that me and my husband agree on, which I'm excited about because I typically do the cooking there. So if I make butter and sugar in the grits, everybody eats it. So for us, it's butter and sugar all day. And I'm not debating anybody on this. If you choose to put grits and cheese in your butter, grits and cheese in your butter. If you choose to put butter and cheese in your grits, go ahead. You're entitled to your own taste buds. But for us, we're getting some sugar and butter every time. Okay, now let's get into our episode with Stacey Abrams. On the show today, we have someone whose influence spans the worlds of law, politics, literature, and advocacy. She is a visionary leader, a celebrated New York Times bestselling author, and a tireless champion for justice and democracy. From her groundbreaking work in voting rights and her incisive political analysis to her captivating storytelling and the recent buzz around her new book, Coded Justice, please welcome to the show the amazing and inspirational Stacey Abrams.
Thank you for having me. This is a delight.
So first of all, just saying all of that, I'm like, when do you have time for yourself? This is a lot.
I believe very strongly in the importance of doing the things that are important, doing the things that are urgent, but also doing things that are neither important nor urgent. Dwight Eisenhower had this quadrant, and I spend a lot of time watching TV and reading books and just letting myself recharge so I can come back and do the other stuff.
Love that. See, most people don't do that. They burn out. They go, burn out. So I love that you understand like self-care matters. Let me do this for me. I had to learn that later in life. Like you fill yourself up first and then you can conquer, what it is you need to do.
I mean, sometimes self-care sounds like another job. But when you think about it, it's like, now you got to go take care of yourself. I believe in things that are not important and not urgent. So it doesn't require my worry, my anxiety, and not always my attention. And if you can do that, then all the other pieces, including the annoying, urgent things that aren't your fault and the important things you never get to, become much more accessible.
So true. That's actually a great way of explaining that. Okay, so we have to get into your latest literary endeavor, Coded Justice, because we have to start there. This is your newest book, and it dives into the complex world of AI. Talk about what drew you to that, and how did you just create an entire world around this?
I love writing stories about big topics that most people feel they don't have either the right or the ability to delve into, either because it's too complicated, it's remote, it's something I'll read about later. So, I've bookmarked 12 things in TikTok to teach me about it later. but it also has to feel of the moment. And most of my books, especially my legal thrillers, really try to take on these complicated topics and give readers a way in that feels entertaining and engaging. But when you leave, you feel like, oh, I can talk about this, or at least when I hear about it, I feel better equipped. And AI is absolutely one of those areas. The beginning of the story for me was a conversation with my niece, who is a 15-year-old, or she was about 15 or 16 when I started thinking about this topic. She was using ChatGPT, and I said, I think you're cheating. Because you and I remember microfiche.
Oh, yes.
And so...
Period.
But she was told, her teachers told her to use it. And just how accessible information is for this generation is extraordinary, but also how they navigate it. And when you extrapolate from that to all of the ways AI will touch our lives, I wanted to understand it myself, because I don't like it when a teenager knows more than I do and can lord it over me.
Yes.
But it was also it was one of those areas where there was a hesitation in me. And anytime I feel hesitant about learning something, that's the time to dive deep. And so I wanted to create a story that intersected a few pieces using AI as the fulcrum. But I wanted to talk about healthcare issues. I wanted to talk about DEI because it is under attack and it is so important to how our democracy thrives. And I wanted to use a sympathetic audience, which are veterans, who are very much representative of the challenges we face around healthcare and are among the most diverse populations we have in this nation. And the fundamental question was, AI is a tool that can be used to build and a tool that can be used to destroy. We often think about it in the abstract. What happens when good people use tools and bad things happen? And that's the crux of the story.
It is. I mean, it's great to think about, because I remember hearing about AI and I thought like, oh no, the robots are taking over. What is this going to be? But to your point, there is the good, but it can go wrong, right? And so how do we find the balance between that? And then who actually, I remember, do you remember the story? It was a movie, I, Robot.
Oh, of course.
Okay, so I remember watching this and I was thinking in my mind, like, this could really happen one day. And so as AI came about, I was like, oh no, it's here. And so, as I think about AI, it does have the advantages 100%. But there's those areas where we struggle, right? Where we try to find the balance of what happens if this happens. I think that's the part that people want answered. Is what are our answers if something does go rogue? If something goes wrong, how do we deal with that?
Well, and I think that's absolutely one of the pillar questions, but I think there are a few that happen before that are the ones that worry me the more.
Okay.
One is that before it goes rogue, what if it just goes wrong? Because rogue assumes intent, or either that it intended to do something to us, or that because of its program, something happens.
Okay.
But what is more worrisome to me are those tools that are intended for our good, but because we don't understand them, when they make mistakes. So one of the pieces of AI is hallucination.
Yes.
Basically, it's a program. And if it cannot give you an answer, it will make one up. And that's because when it's being programmed, AI can't think. AI can pattern match. And it can only pattern match from the information it has. And so it's scraping all of this data. And when it tries to put that data together in a coherent answer, in the absence of an answer that it's been given, it will create a new answer. And it will even create sources for that answer. And we saw that happen when Secretary Kennedy of Health and Human Services issued a report that was an AI-generated report that made up medical histories and medical text. And so one of the things we have to remember is that when we have people in positions of power relying on AI, if they don't understand the limits, we have to live with the product. And that product in that case could have caused actual human harm. So there's what happens when they just get it wrong. Then the second is the question of what if it's intending to do good, but outside of hallucination, there's also an issue of alignment. Alignment is the conversation of how is it deciding the sourcing of its information and how is it deciding how to leverage the information it has. So when Grok decided to become Hitler a few weeks ago, that was because in its training model and in its coding, it was told to scrape information from X, which is filled with vitriol and invective and racism and Nazism. And so when Grok started answering questions, its alignment model gave it instructions to use this data set. That means that when the president of the United States issues an executive order saying you cannot train AI using DEI, it's essentially saying you cannot make certain that the AI data sets actually take into account that women are different than men, possibly, because that's technically DEI, that it may make sense to think about ability in this context because the disability population has these constraints in how they navigate. When we can't do those things, that's not about whether, HAL throws us off of, 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's a question of whether the AI chatbot we're told to use now to get access to our services believes that we are entitled or not. And the last example I'll give you is an example on the issue of algorithmic justice. And that's another term of art that I learned in my research. We know that facial recognition is artificial intelligence. Well, facial recognition routinely mistakes dark skin and routinely mistakes men and women and of certain phenotypes. Well, there was a possibility of a public housing unit using AI and facial recognition, but with absolutely no rules about who could have access to the data. And so that public housing could have sent these faces and flagged someone as being a criminal, sent that information to a police department and gotten someone in trouble.
Right.
We don't think about that because it's not the far ends of, Star Trek or Star Wars. But what it is, it's Thursday because we have this technology today. And so part of what I want Coded Justice to do is to take it out of the fantastical and bring it back to the reality that we're living. Right now, there are AI tools making choices about what our faces look like. And I can prove it because when you go through TSA to get on a plane and you stand there and have to stare at the camera, it is matching your face to records that it has about who you are. We've decided that's okay because we want to get through the airport faster. So we've given up facial recognition for 15 extra minutes of convenience. That's the AI I want us to think about. Yes, we want to be concerned about, whether the robot tries to kill us. But what I want us to understand and believe that we have the right to understand is that AI exists in so many parts of our lives today.
Right.
This is a way through Avery Keene and her team of super geniuses working with her client that AI is very real, that it's your Uber order, but it's also your doctor's orders.
So true. Okay, so you mentioned Avery Keene. So she is, if for those that don't know and need to catch up, she is a Black female lawyer, and she's the former Supreme Court clerk, correct?
Correct.
That's a lot of C's.
Yes.
What aspects of her character and experiences were really important for you to share as she goes through confronting all of this that's going on with artificial intelligence?
So Avery has always been a character I love because she's someone who is thrown in these situations where she's got a lot of responsibility, but no authority. And many of us live our lives being told we got to get something done, but without the resources or the power to make it happen. And while that happened to her when she was a Supreme Court clerk, it happened to her when she got into some issues with the president of the United States. This time, she's a lawyer at a law firm. She's working for a big tech firm that's about to go public. So she's excited about this. But once again, she has to confront the limits of her own knowledge, the limits of her own power. And she also has to start to confront some of the internal conflicts that she has for herself, but also amongst her team, because the conversation of AI isn't a straight line. There are legitimate critiques of what it should or should not do. They have an argument about whether, in order to improve the healthcare of veterans, it should be okay to know if they have a criminal record, because that can inform a psychological model. That seems on its face to some to be absolutely permissible, and to others, it's an invasion of privacy. But do we know? And so I love the fact that Avery has to grapple with some really basic questions, but also some tougher philosophical questions. And she's got to do so hoping that the AI doesn't kill us all.
That part. So I think, okay, when I'm thinking about this book and you think about the readers, especially those that may be less familiar with AI, what are the technical aspects that they need to take away from Coded Justice? And also, what do you suggest that these readers begin to think about and consider doing as they go through this book and learn more?
So in order to write Coded Justice, I spent a lot of time doing very deep dives into AI, reading about it from the perspective of healthcare, from the perspective of policy, from the perspective of just the technology itself. And I don't want anyone else to have to do that. So the first job as a writer is to make certain that when you are reading this, you are learning it, but it doesn't feel like you're in school. It feels like you are overhearing or engaging in this. But by the time you get to the end, when you hear the term LLM, you don't think that it's a foot fungus. You recognize that it's a large language model, and that what they're just talking about is the chat bot that you use to order pizza. Right. That when you hear about alignment, or you hear about issues of hallucination, that you know what it means. That when you're in your doctor's office and you see them taking notes but not writing anything down, that you understand why it's happening that way. So I want people to feel more comfortable with AI. Right. And that comfort is important. It should not feel like you are dealing with a foreign adversary. It should feel like you're dealing with a technology that happens to be just more advanced than we're used to. But the second thing is that you have the right to ask questions. We are trained to feel embarrassed by our ignorance. I am very comfortable seeking information. Be curious is my mantra. And curiosity presumes I don't know something. And so I want people who read this to feel that they have the right to ask questions. When their doctor says, I'm using AI, can I record this? Ask what they're going to do with the information. Ask how they're gathering the information. Ask whether or not the company, the developer that made this, took their needs into account. Because as you see these shifts in how these developers are building these tools, the tools are only as good as the inputs. And even if the inputs are well-intended, if they're not well-tended, they could go awry. And that's the larger conversation about, on the policy level, whether there's a moratorium on regulating AI. We can't ask those questions if we're not allowed to regulate it. And so when your policymakers tell you, well, we don't want to put too many regulations because it'll stifle innovation, what they're saying is we don't want to ask questions because we may not like the answers. And that's never good. So I want people leaving this book to feel empowered, to feel smarter, but to also feel a responsibility to ask questions, because AI is not sentient. Its developers are. Its owners are. The billionaires who are making their money off of it. They want your data and they want your attention. And in order for them to get that, they have to give you answers.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that, because I think back to, I was watching something on television. They were talking about, and you mentioned this before too, people that go through for TSA PreCheck as well as your global entry. Mm-hmm. All of that information that you fill out, you then have to sign at the end saying that it's okay for them to use, not even recognizing that and realizing that. And I'm going to be honest and raise my hand after watching that. I was like, oh my gosh. In your mind, you think, well, it's probably just going to say, that it's going to use it for certain things. And I'm like, but how do you know? How do you know what you've given up? Because we are so quick to just go through and sign because we want that. What do you say to those? Because I'm one of those that think about that. Like, oh my gosh, how I can't go back. Well, how do we basically, what can we do now to make sure that this information that we've now given them does not go to places where we don't want it to be?
And that's why we need state and federal regulation of AI. We cannot individually negotiate with Meta and with Anthropic about whether you can have my data, because some of its data we didn't know we'd given away because we signed the agreements 20 years ago.
Right.
And when they acquired that data set from that company that no longer exists, they now have all our information. Like if they bought it from Columbia House, they know how many records I bought and exactly how many things I got for a penny. I didn't know at the time that they would have that information.
Yes.
So part of the reason regulation is so important is that we can't do it individually. It's why we have society. It's why we have government. It's scale. And so ask your state legislators, ask your school board members, what are they doing with your children's data? Ask your city council member, what are they doing with your tax records? And then we need to demand that Congress also take action. But that's why it's so important. And that's why when you hear people tell you, oh, that's just regulation and they're just trying to add red tape. Yes, I want you to do on a scale that covers all of us that which is impossible for me to do as an individual. And that's not just smart. That's good leading. It's good leadership to say we're going to try to protect everyone, especially from things that most of us don't fully understand. But if you get my DNA today, I know what you can do with it. But if I gave you my DNA 20 years ago, I would have had no idea what I was giving up. We can't tell what's going to happen with AI in 2 weeks, let alone 2 years or 20 years. And now is the time to start asking questions and demanding that our leaders put guardrails around it so that we aren't being led by their inaction as opposed to our decisions.
That's great. And that's a great way to put it. So just demanding, okay, no matter who you are, where you are, just going to your leaders and saying, this is what we want. This is what we need. And I think oftentimes, Stacey, we forget that they are working for us. Yes. And we just kind of allow them to do without any say so. And a lot of people are giving up those rights and not realizing it. And so, I mean, this kind of goes into second quarter I talked about politics and voting rights and advocacy. And there's almost this brainwashing of rights as a citizen and the expectations that you give to government, just thinking that they're going to do what you expect them to do versus demanding and advocating and fighting for that. And we all know that your name is synonymous with voting rights and fighting against voter suppression. What would you say are the most pressing challenges now? And what would you suggest to people that maybe recognize, you know what, I kind of have like sat back and kind of let the guardrails just be? What would you say to them as we navigate this new world, is what I call it, because it's a lot different than I feel like when my parents were growing up?
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier, I have this mantra. It's be curious, solve problems, do good. So the first job is be curious. Part of what happens is that the world moves around us, and unless it directly affects us, we just have too much on our plates. We've got too many things to do to try to follow every single trend. And you and I grew up with 3, broadcast stations and PBS. Yes. And now there is a newsletter for every day of the week, every letter of the alphabet, and every facet of your personality. You can't read it all.
It's true.
But you can decide to do some investigation. So I have a podcast called Assembly Required, and it's for exactly that purpose. Here are the big topics. So if you don't want to read my legal thrillers, which you should read, you can go to my podcast because I take some of these big topics. This week, we're talking about what's happening with Stephen Colbert and with Skydance, but also, why does it matter that we're seeing this mega consolidation in the media? And what does it mean when the president of the United States extorts money from media companies for stories he doesn't like? Those are important questions about our democracy. Because when the president doesn't have to have the truth told because he doesn't like it, what lies will he now tell us about what he's doing with the power we've loaned him? Because it's loaned power. So visit Assembly Required, but also find other podcasters or other newsletters that give you good information. Listen to this podcast every single time. So our first job is to be curious. Our second job is to see how they're solving problems. And that's why your elected officials should know your name. They should know that you are paying attention. You don't have to pay attention to everything, but pay attention to them so that when an issue comes up, when you call, they know I'm going to have to find an answer. It is easy for politicians to not respond if they know there's no consequence. I like to say politicians are like teenagers. We respond to money, peer pressure, and attention.
Facts.
And so most of us don't have any money to make them do stuff. And peer pressure means you have to get elected. And so attention is our most important and salient tool. So let's use it. But then it's, how do you do good? And that's the most important part in this moment. We are watching the decimation of democracy, which sounds abstract. What we're talking about is people are getting hurt every single day. Their lives are being made harder by those who swore an oath to make their lives easier. And so part of our job is to insert ourselves in the path of doing good. So at the end of our podcast and through my Substack assembly notes, I give you ideas. Like, here's something you can do, because there's just too much.
Yes.
And there's so much. But we don't have to do everything everywhere all at once. We can all do something somewhere soon. It's a terrible title for a movie. Everything everywhere all at once works. But something somewhere soon is a much better mission statement. If we believe that, then we can fight for democracy by going to a food bank, because we know that they have lost their USDA money. We can go to a school and read to kids because we know they're banning books. We can do things that are within our wheelhouse without having to try to fix every house. But if we do those three things, if we're curious, we try to solve problems, and we try to do good, that's how we navigate this moment. And that's what democracy is designed to do.
That's really good. That's why you make it so clear and concise, which that's why I absolutely love listening to you. And I know a lot of other people were able to watch you speak when you were on Jimmy Kimmel. And you did such a great job laying out those 10 steps to autocracy and what that looks like. And it went viral. Everybody was, and I know it was one of those things that was just like, but the way you laid it out was incredible. Talk about that experience. And then when you saw this, were you just like, oh my gosh, were you shocked?
Well, it began with an answer I gave to a group of students through the John Lewis Fellowship Program run by the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation, the good Robert Kennedy. And one of the students asked me, basically, will America be around in a decade or 20 years? And I explained, given the trajectory we are on, our democracy may not be. Because most autocrats, most authoritarian nations that exist today were democracies before. You don't have the juntas and the military overthrows. You have elections. But then the next 10 things follow. So I gave them that 10 steps because that was my answer. And I want to give credit to Kim Sheppel, who was the professor who I was on a presentation with, and she listed 10 steps. I kind of remixed it and added and editorialized a bit. But it's all true. It all works. And so based on that, they put that out on TikTok, and the Jimmy Kimmel Show saw it, and that's why they asked me about it. But what is so heartening for me was that it resonated, because it signaled that people are hungry for how to understand this moment, but they're also hungry for how they can help. They want to save our country. You're not paranoid. They really are after you. And this was a moment where people felt connected to each other. Connected in their terror, but still connected. And so my job as someone who believes in trying to do good is to help people understand the moment we're in, but then to know, okay, now here's what you do. Because as much as I appreciated the first question, I also appreciated the question, now what do we do about it? And that's the work that I really want us to get into. We can't stop what's happening by ourselves, but together we can mitigate it, and we can make certain it's not permanent. That's our responsibility.
So when I think about that, I think about the media and culture, and I think about, all of that when you look at legislation. What role do you believe that the media plays that really helps shape the public's eye? Just understanding, engagement, political issues, voting rights, all of these things I think about, and I say to myself, how can we change the narrative when it comes to media and social media? Because what's out there is completely different than a lot of the truth, let's be honest.
Yeah. So the very first novel I wrote was a romance novel based on my concerns about environmental justice. That was back in 1999. And back then we had a very stable media environment. You still had bad information getting out there. It was at the rise of Fox News, which was important. It's important to understand that Fox News came about because of the elimination of the fairness doctrine. Prior to Ronald Reagan, you didn't have the sort of wild west of truth or not truth,
yes,
because they had standards. Where we are today is that we have a fractured media environment. We have news stations that are owned by conglomerates that see those news stations as the least important and certainly the least lucrative facet of their business model. And we have a very loose association with the truth because we get to curate the realities we want. And then it doesn't help that we have leaders, including the leader of the free world, suborned by a Congress that has said, say whatever you want, as long as we get reelected, you're good. It doesn't help when the truth has become a commodity as opposed to an intention and a responsibility. And so if that's where we are, part of what I think we have to understand about the media is step 6 of the 10 steps to autocracy. Step 6 is that you have to break the media. You have to gut it. You have to make sure people don't trust it. Because if they don't trust the truth, then any lie you tell takes its place. And because we have social media that lets you curate your lies and now animate your lies with AI, because we have not just traditional media, but we have traditional media that's been extorted by a president and is now refusing to tell the truth because they don't want to lose their opportunity to make more money, hence the $16 million settlement for something that didn't happen.
Right.
When those things happen, what we are facing is the responsibility to be even more intentional about finding the truth. There's an extraordinary young woman named Asosa Osa who runs a group called Onyx Impact. She focuses on mis and disinformation, particularly for communities of color, specifically for Black communities, but she talks about everyone. It's not enough to look for the truth now. We got to look for the truth, but we have to understand what lies look like. We have to understand what misinformation looks like. But media is so critical because, and I despise quoting him, but Andrew Breitbart said that culture is upstream of politics. And what he means by that is that what we believe about ourselves becomes the laws we put in place for ourselves. Culture comes from what we know, and what we know comes from the media. And if what the media is telling us isn't true, then what we build will not be based on truth. If what we are told is to be afraid of immigrants and be afraid of people of color, if what we are told is that transgender children are the cause of inflation, then we make terrible choices, not because we think that that's the right answer, but because we've been told that's the only truth we should know. And so our responsibility, and again, it's a lot to take on, is to find the truth where we can. So find trusted voices. Look, whoever you listen to on TikTok, double check them a few times just to make sure when you hear something they said, double check it, possibly with ChatGPT, but then do something else. But double check what you learn. But once you find a trusted voice, listen to it. But don't just listen to one voice. I read multiple papers. I listen to multiple stories and multiple authorities because everyone's going to shape it with their own lens. My job is to build my own prism. And from that, see where the light shines the sharpest so that I can learn the most.
That's really good. That's actually a great way of explaining it, because I do feel like a lot of people don't even know where to start, when it comes to reading. And even when you do read, do you believe what you read? And how do you go back through and check again and make sure what you're reading is factual? So I think that's a struggle for a lot of people. And I love that you have your podcast and you have information that you share that they know has been double checked, triple checked, so that they know that, they don't know. Listening to everyone, they're like, is this true? Is it not true? Well, let me check over here. And it's just, you go down this rabbit hole and you're just like, I don't know anymore of what to believe. Yeah. So the fact that there's women out there that are fighting for the truth and finding the lies and making sure everyone knows is so important. So if you guys need to know, listen to Stacey. That's all I have to say, because
well, thank you.
You break it down so eloquently. You just do a great job with that.
Thank you.
But okay, so we're gonna pivot a little bit and talk about another fascinating aspect of your writing career, which is like your romance novels. First of all, okay, so you started in this world of writing. How did you decide, I want to write romance novels? Because there's this serious side of politics and this and check, but then there's this other side of you. Like, where did this come from?
So I mentioned that my very first novel was based on my interest in environmental justice.
Yes.
And that was actually, it was a story that I took from my ex-boyfriend's dissertation. He's a chemical physicist. Anyway, it's a long story.
Okay.
Bad breakup. We became friends again. I read his dissertation, like one of 5 people outside of his committee that read it. And I had this idea because he discovered this chemical and it could do these really amazing things. And I called him and I'm like, ooh, I read your dissertation. And what if it did this and that? And he was like, none of that can happen. I'm like, this is why we broke up. You have no imagination. And he scoffed at me. And so in my book, he's in prison, but without parole. But the reason I mentioned that was I actually intended it to be a spy novel. I wanted to write espionage. But I was told this is in the late 90s, and I sent the first 3 chapters out to publishers who all liked the story, but they said espionage, women don't write espionage, women don't read espionage, which was clearly not true. I read Robert Ludlum. I read the Bond novels. But they also said, you're a Black woman, you'd have to change the character because your main character can't be a Black woman. And I was deeply annoyed on a host of levels. And so one, I was like, as a woman, I know I've seen women spies, and I realized I'd read them in romance or I saw them on General Hospital. And then 2,
yes,
yeah. and then the second part was I wanted to tell this story for an audience that was not intended to get access. And romance is one of the most amazing media to use to tell these kinds of stories. I remember all of these romance novels I used to just read voraciously. And it occurred to me, as someone who loved reading romance, I could kill the same number of people I planned to in my spy novel. I would just make sure that my spies fell in love. And so I got a chance to take that very same story, but it opens with an explosion and ends with, a lot of other things. But in the middle, I got to test myself writing characters who had to navigate not only their complicated policy issues, trying to save the world, but had to save themselves by finding themselves with each other. And once I did the first one, I realized how much fun it was to take these heady topics and make them accessible, again, using a medium like romance, because critics don't always understand just how thoughtful romance can be. Now, I use a pseudonym, not because I was ever ashamed of talking about or being a romance writer, but I was also publishing articles on tax policy at the exact same time. And no one was going to read a romance novel by Alan Greenspan or Jerome Powell. So I had to keep my identity separate. And that's why Selena Montgomery wrote romance. And Stacey Abrams wrote The Operational Dissonance of the Unrelated Business Income Tax Exemption, which I'm sure you also read. So that was the
reason you used that name. Okay, so that totally makes sense now. Because I always wondered, I wonder why. Okay.
My face was in the book. I love romance. I don't believe in guilty pleasure. I think if it makes you happy and doesn't harm anyone, then you should enjoy it. And there should be no shame, especially in romance. Romance is one of the hardest genres to write in. I've written romance, legal thrillers, nonfiction, children's books. I write a lot. When someone knows from the moment they open the first page how the story ends, getting them from page 1 to the last page is really hard.
Yeah,
and that's
so
what
true.
Romance has to do.
And women love romance.
Yes.
You can intertwine it in no matter what, in any type of book. And there's that moment they'll always it'll be near and dear to their heart. That's just how we're built.
Exactly.
I feel like that's how we're made. There's another character that you've spoken about, Maxine Shaw in Living Single. Yes. So I absolutely love her character for many reasons. And she's also from Arizona, just like myself. But you said that she inspired you to go to law school. Can you elaborate on that?
So not inspired me to go to law school, but inspired me as a lawyer. So
as a lawyer, okay.
Yeah. By the time Living Single came out, I was already in law school. But
you were?
Yeah. So I graduated from law school in 99.
Got it. Okay. That's fair.
But what was so important about Maxine Shaw was that if you wanted to see the representation of a Black woman as a lawyer, you either had to watch Law and Order or you had to close your eyes.
Yep.
And Maxine Shaw she was a lawyer, but she was such a full, rich character.
Yes.
Who was smart and clever and wholly authentic. And she was sly, but she was also vulnerable. And witty.
Yes.
Yeah, she was everything. She was what was beautiful about how Living Single was created was it was intentionally and effortlessly diverse, even though every main character was Black. And it did not lean into a single stereotype. Instead, it inverted those stereotypes to tell us that we were capable of being anyone and anything. And Maxine Shaw was the funniest part of that, because like, if you remember the episode where she's jumping up and down on the coffee table when Overton turns her in, like I remember like almost every line she's ever delivered because the writing was so sharp. But more importantly, Erica Alexander's delivery was so full-throated and so real that you imagine that if you moved to Brooklyn, she'd be your next door neighbor.
You thought you knew her. Yeah. That's exactly how I felt. And it's so incredible to see all that she's done. And I love the nuances of the different types of relationships throughout the show. You know, it was not singular, from the friendships to the romantic relationships to the girlfriend sisterhood. There was just even the guys and the girls. Like, I just really, for me, it'll be my all-time favorite. Like, living single, period. Like, it's the original girlfriends.
I will just add that it was one of the few shows you will find with an ensemble cast where every single cast member, every character had a relationship that was singular and unique with every other character.
Yes.
Khadijah had a relationship with Overton. Overton had a relationship with with Regine. Regine had a relationship with Kyle. Kyle had a relationship with Sinclair. And there were these tiny moments. And this goes back to writing. When you can take tiny moments and build entire scaffolds of engagement and storytelling that are so resonant that we are talking about a show that has not been on the air and broadcast in 30 years.
Yes. And you still love it. You still remember it. There was a moment, I believe, recently where Erica Alexander, she was on, I think they did like a reunion and they were all sitting there. I can't remember all of it, but I remember she looked at him and she said to him, you know, you were more than just my boyfriend. You know, you were a safe space. Yeah. You were my brother, my protector. And she went through this whole list. And it was such a beautiful moment. And it showed how important each role was on that show. And it made my heart sing. I was like, oh, this is so beautiful. Exactly. So you don't see a lot of that anymore. So I'm really thankful for shows like that. And I'm hoping we get some new ones that come out. So, you know, if you want to move over to the television side, Stacey, I mean.
We're working on the screenplay for While Just Asleep. So you've got Avery Keene, you've got Jared Wynn, you've got Noah Fox, and you've got Ling Yen. They are, for those who haven't gotten their copy of Code of Justice, that's the Scooby team that Avery leads, and they've shown up now in 3 books together. And so we're trying to get her to the small screen because I think those kind of ensemble characters really help tell just the richest stories.
Yes, it's necessary. It's necessary. I would absolutely love that. We need some more of that on television and on the screen. And before we leave, I know we talked about politics and we talked about romance. How would you say these two, you know, I think about the right brain and the left brain and how we need both, right? How do they intersect for you and make you fully who you are?
I believe in telling stories.
Okay.
And I think whether you are explaining tax policy or trying to uncover, you know, a presidential conspiracy, or you are starting a small business, or you're trying to make sure that democracy holds, it's about telling a story. And that requires both sides of the brain. There's the analytic side that helps you break it down so that people can understand what you need. And there's the creative side that makes them feel like they were a part of the story from the very beginning. The most effective way to communicate is for someone to believe that they have a role to play in what happens next. And it's the song that you listen to that you feel like was curated specifically for that moment in your life, even though they didn't know you and they will never meet you. But that is the soundtrack for the moment that you need. That's storytelling. Mm-hmm. But to put the chords and the harmony in place, to write the lyrics, that's storytelling that takes left and right brain. I try my best to live with my whole brain working, because we create more space for people when they can see themselves not just in the problems, but as part of a solution set, when they believe they have a choice that didn't reveal itself until they had a moment to sit and reflect. And so for me, I'm privileged, I'm blessed with this opportunity to write books, to have a podcast, to have a Substack, to use all of these tools to tell stories that I hope make people believe that they have not just the capacity, but the real opportunity to make the world the way they want to see it.
That's great. When you look back at your incredible journey so far, what is a moment for you that when you think of achievement, it brings you the most personal satisfaction in your life?
I wouldn't say that it's the most, but I will say there's a singular one that's important to me.
Okay.
When I was minority leader, I was able to start a small cohort. It was called the Blue Institute. And the purpose of the Blue Institute was to get more young people of color involved in politics outside of being hired to be canvassers, which is an important job. Field organizing is incredibly important. But often in politics, people of color, especially women of color, those are the jobs they get. And I wanted to say that if we want to see our body politic reflect our communities, they've got to have all the jobs. They've got to be campaign managers and finance directors and comms leaders. And I created this institute. And at the end of the institute, every single one of our cohort got a job on a national campaign, on a congressional campaign. They got out there. And the reason that comes to mind is that I met one of our students, one of our young people who was in the cohort. I was in Boston a couple of days ago. And she told me, like, that was the first time I got a job doing this thing. I didn't know I could. And so when I think about the impact that we can have, it's a question of not what did you do in that moment, but did it resonate? Did it hold? And did they do something that they thought they couldn't? And did you get to play a small role in not directing their lives, but directing their attention to opportunity?
That's beautiful. Okay. Speaking of that, especially with women, what's one piece of advice that you would give women who aspire to lead, whether that's in business or politics or within their communities? What would you think about it with the insurmountable odds, what would you say to them?
It's what my dad told all of us. He said, never tell yourself no. Let somebody else do it. We stop ourselves from trying so much because we're afraid of the answer. What my dad said is, look, you didn't have it before, and if they tell you no, you still don't have it. What's the difference? The difference is now you know.
That's good. Come on, Dad, with the gems.
He's pretty good.
He's really good.
My mom's awesome too, but yeah, my dad.
Oh, that is awesome. Okay, what's next for you? Are there any particular areas of advocacy or politics, or what are you exploring in the next upcoming years?
No, right now I'm focused on continuing to talk about the 10 steps to autocracy because we've got to do the work to save our democracy. And it's got to be worth it, which means we've got to show how democracy can deliver for people. I'm working on DEI. I encourage people, if you care to know more about DEI and why it's such a critical facet of preserving our democracy, visit aprnetwork.org. I've created a series of organizations and we're fighting for DEI because the reason it's under such attack is that it's working. It makes certain that the freedom to discriminate does not return to this country. And that's why they're trying to eliminate it. They don't like competition and they would prefer discrimination, and we're saying no.
Yes.
And then 3, I'm out there telling stories, hoping people will continue to read Avery Keene's novels. I want her to have a rich and long life. I want her to continue to be in love. And she has a few little hiccups in this book with her relationships. So I want to see what happens to her. But for me, it's just about being able to continue to do the work of helping people have their best opportunities, their best lives. And if I get to play a small role, that's what I want to do.
I love that. Okay, one more question, because I just thought about this when I was thinking about women. When you think about like online dating, casual connections, how do you encourage women to navigate the romance side of life in this world of dating online? Like, it's hard. And when you talk about pictures and all of that, and like, what would you say?
I have no idea. If somebody has the answer, I will be your customer. I have been very accomplished in many ways. I have not figured out dating. Look, I told you, one of my boyfriends is in prison because of how it ended up. It's a book, but still.
But still, it felt great. I love that.
So I think you and I should be doing a pitch to anyone out there. If you've got the answer and you want guinea pigs, let us know.
That's a good one. I love that, Stacey. Okay, before you leave, we always play this game called the 2-minute drill. And it just gives people an opportunity to get to know you. And it's either this or that or fill in the blanks. Super easy. Okay, let me start the timer. The first one is, romance or nonfiction?
Romance.
The most important quality in a leader is?
Authenticity.
Early bird or night owl?
Night owl.
My favorite character from my Avery Keene series is?
Jared.
Okay.
No, I'm going to change my mind. Actually, my favorite character is Hayden.
Hayden, okay.
Hayden from book 2.
Okay, from book 2. Got it. Paperback or e-reader?
Paperback.
The most rewarding part of fighting for voting rights is?
Winning.
Facts. In-person rally or virtual town hall?
In-person rally.
Supreme Court drama or political thriller?
Political thriller.
The biggest misconception people have about you is?
I don't know. I'm going to ask you to fill in the blank.
Well, I don't have any, so I can't speak to that. But, I don't know if you've heard things. You're like, it's not my problem. But, yeah, that's fair.
That's fair. I will say more than likely, whatever the misconception was, I'm like, okay.
Not my problem.
Tell yourself a story.
Exactly, that part. I love that. Okay, plotting a novel or campaign strategizing?
Which would I prefer to be doing?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
That's tough for you. That's why.
I was going to say, I love the fact that you think there's a difference.
Oh, that's good. I love that. Okay, do you prefer sweet or savory?
Sweet.
All right, I define justice as?
Free will met with mercy.
And if people want to get a hold of you, where do they find you?
Follow me at Stacey Abrams at every single social media site you can imagine.
Okay, there's one more thing I thought of, and I have to ask this to you because you've done so much. What would you tell little Stacey?
Little Stacey or younger Stacey?
Younger Stacey, baby Stacey, the younger one that had all the hopes and dreams and maybe the things that you were unsure of. What would you say to her now?
He's not that cute, and you are.
Bam! We're stopping right there. That was amazing. Thank you so much for gracing the podcast, Stacey. It was so fun. I am so excited about the world because of people like you. Not just because of your brilliance and your intellect, but because your personality, you're so fun and you have a great sense of humor and you spread love in the world in many different ways, which, like you said, a lot of people don't use both sides, but you do. So thank you for all that you do. And I can't wait for other people to reach out to you and ask you questions.
Toya, this is a delight. Now, I need to clarify, just in case Avery is real in her AI universe. Of course, she's my favorite, but I loved Hayden. That was one of the most fun characters to write.
Okay, so they're your top 2.
No, just this is. I usually avoid that question. I wanted to answer it in the context of which character was the most fun to write, and that would be Hayden.
Okay, there you go.
But Atoya, thank you so much. This was awesome, and I appreciate it.
Okay, well, that's a wrap for Inside Lines podcast. I'm your host, Atoya Burleson, where we talk about real stories, real talk every week. Please don't forget to subscribe and share and leave it all out on the field. See you next time.